No questions. All right. This morning, no mai haere mai. My name's Stewart Brown. I was the director of the Rotorua Museum just prior to the museum closing. I'm now manager of arts and culture for the city. And I'm just going to take you a little bit through the journey since the closure of the museum, to give the community just a little bit more information and understanding on why the process has taken as long as it has. So we'll get underway. So firstly, these are some of the original construction photographs of the museum back in 1906 to 1907. And here, what you'll see is some of the early construction methods, and probably draw your attention to the bottom slide here on your left. What you can see there is the foundations of the museum. So these are pumice concrete foundations laid directly onto the ground, so they're not in situ in the ground. And what's noticeably absent from those photographs is the absence of any steel, which is part of the challenge that we've got with the museum. So this is pumice concrete. Its strength, so when we did some testing of the strength of pumice concrete, normally in a commercial build you would have about 40% what they call MPa, which is how you measure the strength of concrete, and the pumice concrete within the museum comes in at 3.8 to 9. So less than 10% of the strength of what's required. I've got some samples here, so I can pass those around and you can have a look at exactly what's in the walls. And so you can appreciate some of the challenges that we have. So these actual photographs have really been helpful for the structural engineers, because a lot of the build is actually not documented that well. All right, so where are we at in terms of the construction? So back when the museum closed in 2016, we had to do what we call a DSA, which is a detailed seismic assessment. So that's understanding the current strength of the museum, how it's put together, what's its seismic capability. From there, we moved through into a concept design, so just an overall design, high level of the seismic strengthening, and just integrating with all those compliance stuff like the new fire regulations we have to comply with now, accessibility regulations, etc. Then the piece of work that we've just finished, which is the developed design, and that is really where we bring everything together, so including the high-vac or air conditioning systems, electrical systems, fire systems. Really it's the core base final design of what the museum is going to look like. The next phase is detailed design, and we'll be working through detailed design now, right up until we actually start construction. We are already started doing what we call deconstruction or enabling work, so we're already starting to strip out those things that aren't heritage or not required, or we're de-risking the project by uncovering the walls so we can see what's behind them. So that work did start in July with the asbestos removal, and it's continuing today. We are out for tender right now, so we expect to have a contractor on board by about mid-November for the construction phase. All right, so if I just cast back to November 2016, the 14th, the Kaikoura earthquake happened. It wasn't that actual particular earthquake that created the issue for us. It was a local event that was triggered potentially by the Kaikoura earthquake. And this shows you some of the things that we found the following day. So the building already had a number of cracks in it. And they appeared, and in fact it's documented that cracks started to appear in the building simply because of its structure about a year after it originally opened. But these were new cracks, and many more of them, and some of them quite wide. We found that there was 142 new cracks under the floor just alone. So that shows you. As I said, there's no steel in any of this, so the reason why it's quite weak. All right, it's a complex build. It's a 1908 heritage building, Category 1 building, so that means we have to take as much care as possible and ensure that we look after as much as the heritage fabric as we possibly can. So it does require some specialist work and some special considerations. Before we can actually get a resource consent, we need to complete conservation plans and heritage protection plans. So those plans really, it says, if we're going to put steel into the wall here, how are we going to protect those heritage items around it while we do it? It's a weak structure. As I mentioned before, the foundations and walls are quite weak. The role that hydrogen sulfide has played over the last 111 years meant a lot of the connections, nails and bolts have actually corroded away. They're not there. It's a heavy roof, so on a day like today, the roof weighs about 400 tonne. So it's an extremely heavy roof. We've got poor ground conditions, so the conditions under the museum, and I've got some shots of those and show you those shortly, is what we call a category D in terms of geotechnical condition of the ground there, so that creates some additional challenges for us. As I mentioned before, hydrogen sulfide, really meeting all the compliance of today's standards, building condition issues, so these are things just literally over the age of the building where certain materials have corroded away or damaged. The absence of actual as-built information, particularly a lot of work that was done in the 40s and 60s and 70s, is not recorded. And we're dealing with, currently right now, we're dealing with 3 individual buildings. So we have the main part, which is the Heritage Building, 1908. We have the North Wing extension of 2008 and the 2011 South Wing extension. So 3 separate buildings. And the challenge from when we closed the course was finding the money that we need to be able to do that project, and we only just finally got that a month or so ago. All right, so where did the money come from? Rotorua Lakes Council, or the Rotorua community really, 15 million. Provincial Growth Fund, which was a recent announcement of 15 million. Rotorua Energy Charitable Trust, 10 million. The Lottery Grants Board, 6 million. The Regional Cultural and Heritage Fund, 5 million. And then a very generous donation from the Philip Berry Charitable Foundation, 100,000 there. So currently sitting fully funded for the project at 51 million. All right, so it's all very well to say fix the building. We really needed to have some objectives in terms of what it is that we were trying to achieve. So these are some of the objectives, and not all of them, but and I won't go through every one, but I'll just go through the really important ones. First one obviously is to deal with the seismic strength of the building. So currently the building sits at 19% of NBS. NBS stands for New Building Standards. So after the Christchurch earthquakes, the building standards were reviewed because, literally because of what we learned from the failures of some of the buildings in Christchurch. And so we're trying to achieve at least 80% of that new building standard. We'll expand the exhibition spaces, the climate control or the scrubbed air system. So we're the only museum in the world that scrubs for sulphur out of the air. A lot of museums generally just scrub for pollutants like carbon dioxide you get from cars, etc. We're going to increase the climate control over more of the building, because the more of that we do, the more it protects it. So the South Wing and the North Wings were the only ones that had scrubbed air systems in there, so we're expanding that. The fire suppression system, that's a whole complete upgrade. Mobility access is another one that improved that to 60 to 90%, so there were a number of areas in the original build that you couldn't get to, and particularly the mud bath basement where you had to leave the building and go outside. I've mentioned regulatory requirements, and then there's obviously the heritage features that we need to protect, and then really making sure that we continue to be able to generate that revenue for the museum in the future, and then we're obviously doing all this at once. Detailed seismic assessment. This is really just understanding what I mentioned before was about the strength of the building, the condition of the timbers, evasive sampling. So samples are passed around just before some of the many samples that we've taken. Connections, and then understanding the ground performance. And so we've redone all the geotech testing, and this the next slide here really shows the condition of the ground. So this is taken from the southern wing, and so we've taken samples all around the building and some on an angle to get under the building. We can't get the equipment directly under the building, But here's an example here of the south wing. So you can see the grey on the right-hand side there is all the mud structure. So that's really smelly, and it's actually quite warm. So it's 6 metres around about 40 degrees. Then you'll see some of the lake bed deposits. So when the Rotorua lake was higher, and then finally on the left-hand side you can see the pumice really there, and this is what the museum sits on. So it is a challenge. Right, so these are just examples of the testing. So that core sample not necessarily came out of this place, but it does actually show you the samples being taken. This in itself, along with the geotech testing, is almost a year's work. So you need to, with the geotech, we had to wait 3 months to get a rig on site, then a further 6 months to get the results and peer review. And the simple reason for that, there's so much demand on these services in the country at the moment with all these earthquake-prone buildings out there. So, and here, this one, that particular shot's in the cafe. So I just maybe to keep in your mind that those are the original tiles of the cafe, because when I do get to the cafe a little bit later, you'll see what we're going to be doing in there. But right the way through, and in fact in the top shot up there, which is right up in the main atrium, the original newspaper from 1906 is still on the wall there, and I think there's a singer sewing machine for so many shillings. So it's all still there, which is fantastic. Alright, so this is, once again I've said, in the gallery spaces, opening up the walls so you can really start to see the actual original structure. So this one in particular here, this crack actually goes right the way through the whole wall, which is about 350 mil thick. And you'll also notice, well, maybe not, but the timber framing is actually not bolted to the concrete wall, so it's just sitting on there. So it's a sheer weight that's keeping it there. And these are some of the old doorways that have been covered up from in the past as well. But as you can see, it was well documented when the building was handed to the city of Rotorua in 1961 that there was significant repairs and maintenance required because of the humidity from the original pools in there. They didn't have fancy ventilation systems like we have today, and it did the damage to all the lava and plaster. You can see parts where the lava has just fallen off. So there we have it. All right, so after we did all that testing, it was discovered that the building, as I said, is an earthquake-prone building. It's 19%. So if your building is under 33% of new building standard, it's earthquake-prone. You've got a time period of about 10 years to fix the building, otherwise it's demolished. All right, the southern end is at 74%, and so some might say, well, 74% was built in 2011, why is it 74%? It's simply the connection. So this is the steel bracing that's connected to the solid floor concrete plate. Those connections are what we call brittle. So they're the ones that failed in Christchurch. They have very little ability to actually move. So while we've actually completely stripped out the museum of all the objects in Tonga, we're going to take that opportunity to redo those connections, and then we'll bring that in back up to about 99%. All right, de-installing. So as I mentioned before, we had to remove all the Tonga from the museum. And so that's not an easy task. It's not like packing up your house from home. There's an enormous amount of planning, consultation with lenders, in particular Te Papa and Auckland Museum, and crates have to be made for each individual piece, and some of those actually engineered. So as well as that, we've got conservation specialists here from all around the country because of the significance of the collection, and we also we have to give a detailed plan to our insurers before we move anything. So it was a huge undertaking, and this took over a year to put in. And we took this out in really 6 months of planning, but it was just over a day and a half to relocate everything. This is the removal of the summer sculptures as well. As I mentioned, individual crates made for each of those. And this was the first time the summer sculptures had actually been removed from the museum in 111 years. They've been there the whole time, even during the Tudor Towers days. So once again, in this particular case, we had to strengthen the floor, so we had to put props under the floor because of the weak structure to move them out, as well as plywood down. And these are all being stored at the off-site storage facility. All right, and there's obviously cultural considerations with Te Arawa, and it was quite a moving day. We've got special air ride trucks to relocate these objects, and the appropriate blessings that took place. All right, so we now know we've got basically a weak structure, a weak building, and so how are we going to fix this? So what we've done is we have a point cloud 3D scan of the museum. So this is actually a picture of that scan. This is a laser that goes around the whole building, inside the building, and fires millions and millions of shot laser beams. Each one of those is a dot, and it builds up the whole structure. And this is what we work in when we're working with our solutions. It is really detailed. So this is the atrium, and as you can see, it even picks up the objects of the retail shop down here, as well as plants. It even picks up how I left my desk. It's even got the original paperwork and all that sort of stuff on it. So it's extremely useful because in the old days you would have gone around with a tape measure and had to re-measure everything. So this is really quite accurate, and it really makes the whole process more manageable and faster. So this is the structural steel solution. So the way that we do that, they've got the model, they build the steel structural solution, then they insert this into the model along with all the other services. So it's bit by bit by bit. In the old days, you would have had drawings, and then as you constructed, you would find that you've got a pipe, the plumber's got a pipe where a beam should be, and so on. So we actually work through the whole building from one end to the other, and we resolve those issues in the model before construction starts. All right, so this is the main structural solution for the atrium. So as you can see, there's a lot to go in there. It's our biggest risk area, simply because of the high walls. We've got 7-8 metre high shear pumice concrete walls with no steel in them. So all these blue lines here are what we call strongbacks, and so they'll be chased into the wall of the walls of the main atrium, and then they'll be replastered over, so you won't know they're there. But they are 10 metres tall, so it's a significant amount of work to go in there. We also need to lift the floor in the mezzanine, because in the mezzanine area you can see this cross bracing here. So we've had to lift, or will be lifting, all the matai tongue and groove flooring, inserting the steel in here, but we have to cut grooves in each of the beams so that the steel sits at the same level, otherwise when we put the floor back it's all going to be high. It's been a real challenge here. You just wouldn't be able to give it off without damaging it. Right, this is a steel solution just for the north wing only. So once again, you've got a significant amount of steel going into the building here, 150,000 kilos all up. This actually goes right the way down through the floor, and these brown areas through here are all new footings. So they're quite wide. As I said before, in the earlier part, the ground conditions here are not that great, so we can't go deep, so we have to go wide and shallow. So that's the structural solution for the north wing. And this is really looking in the mud bath basement, looking back through the building in the model, back towards the front doors, and you can see all the steel coming down. It's got to be come down through the floors and through all the floors as well, going up and down, as well as new footings. So it's quite substantial. Right, and this just really just overrides some of the other strengthening walls back in again, and right. Alright, I can't show you that because we've got a little problem with technology, but basically it's a model. We've got about 40 different models that reenacts the building moving in an earthquake, so it shows you in its new structure down how the building's going to behave, and it's really interesting to see how much it does move. Right, so as I mentioned before, in terms of how we actually go through the building, so each building, part of the building has a zone. Every week for the last year or so, we go through every room by room, looking at all those things where we've got conflict. So you put your steel model into this model, then you put your high-back system into your electrical systems in, and then all your changes. And so you'll end up with conflicts. So you'll end up where you've got a steel structure, and you may have a doorway, or you may have you've got some big high-back tubes like these things here that are going through walls that you want to change. So it's quite a process, and that's just been completed. This is a really important part for us, is this mitigating of the hydrogen sulfide. So all the electrical boards in the north wing are shot, they're beyond repair. So we're going to be replacing the entire north wing, all the electrics in the north wing, and all those controls and panels will go into an isolated room that will be scrubbed with clean air, where at the moment they're not. We're building a new building behind the museum that will house all the chillers. So the chillers that are currently there now that have been doing their job have only been there for about 2-3 years before they start to deteriorate in our environment. And that's $500,000 worth of kit there. And they're shot now. So we want to make sure that whatever we put back, we've done as much as we possibly can to extend the life or reduce the costs on long term. Underfloor shotcrete. So shotcrete is what we're going to do to strengthen the floors. There's 100 ml of concrete that's going to be sprayed underneath the building. It's about 200 truckloads that goes underneath the building. It strengthens the floor, but it'll fill all those cracks in, and that will mean that we won't get hydrogen sulfide seeping up from underneath the building. And then basically we create what we call positive pressure in the building. So like in this, so like if you get a cardboard box, cut a couple of holes in it, get your vacuum cleaner, put it on reverse and put it in one of those holes, the air pours out the other side. Same principle, but on a much bigger scale. And we're going to take advantage of the geothermal bore behind us, where the whole building will be geothermally heated, where at the moment only partially. All right, changes to the building. From the outside, the building will look just as it always has, and as it does now. It won't look any different. And if we can achieve that, then we've really we've done a job. Internally, we do have some changes, and most of those are to meet compliance and to take advantage of the opportunities that we have. From all the challenges that we've come across, they provide opportunities to look at different spaces. So I'll start here. So this is a mezzanine floor upstairs in the museum. And so for those who'd be familiar with the building, there's some offices in these spaces here and here. They were never part of the 1908 build, they were put in later. So we're going to remove those and take it back to the 1908 build. This is just another configuration of it, you know, if there was a small conference in there, for instance. Here, it's probably one of this was a real challenge for us. So on the left-hand side, at the moment, you've got that small lift. And if you, at the moment, if you've got a 50-50 chance of getting to the top because of how old it was and the mechanics to it. So we couldn't get the lift to stay on the other side by meeting compliance with the additional toilets and things we had to put on the other side. So we've moved this now to the other side. So what this does is that this is the entrance into what we call Ngāpu Manawa. And so when you want to go up to the mezzanine floor, or if you want to go down to the mud bath basement, pop in this lift here and it'll either take you up or down, and there's stairs down to the basement. So this is the first time in the building's history that you'll be able to actually access the mud bath basement if you need to in terms of accessibility, those people that need wheelchairs, etc. We're also going to expose some of the steel in the new structure. So some of the conversations we had with Christchurch is that people have a sense of confidence that if they can see some of the strengthening, they have a little bit more confidence about the building itself. And then this is coming down into the mud bath basement area. Once again, we're going to expose a lot of the steel that you saw in those previous slides. And this will take you down with a new exhibition space down through here and round, so you can see the original mud bath basements. Some of the stuff that you've never seen before, you'll get to see this. So this was actually the foundations of what was meant to be a fountain that went into the building in 1908, but actually never got, they ran out of money and never completed it. But the foundation's there. And this is where they used to store all the mud, actually, for the baths, which you can't see that currently either. So you'll get to see some of the changes down there. Where are we now? Right, so here we are. This is actually where Rotorua's shaking Thesis seats was. That's going to be completely removed. It's actually completely destroyed actually in terms of sulfur. I'll ask questions at the end. Yeah, that's a question everybody asks. So to make compliance of toilets now, we've had to put additional toilets into this space. Parent room, we've got accessibility toilets, gender neutral toilets now. And then we've got a new, this new space here, which is a flexible space that we can use potentially for exhibitions, maybe a kids' interactive area. We're not quite sure what it will be, but it's a new space for us. So this is another view of that space. So there's the toilet blocks up here. This is the main atrium through here. Cafe through here with a new mezzanine floor. The cafe is going to be changed slightly, so we're bringing this, taking out the walls that were inserted, I'm not sure when, but certainly going back to the original walls here. And we're also bringing back the original look and feel to this, to the cafe. And in here, actually, there's a glass floor going in here. There's the Rachel pool. This used to be the room used to be called the Rachel pools, and the pool is actually still there underneath the floor. So we're going to re-expose that. We're also going to be reintroducing some of the original doors in the taking the cure where the baths were originally. So there's two new doorways up here. And you'll be able to walk through these spaces where currently you can't get to them. So we're going to give you a better look at some of those spaces as well, and just to try and improve the flow in these spaces for people. All right, so this is the cafe. So that's what the cafe looked like in 1908, the Rachel baths. We've cut a hole in the floor here, and we can see the original baths are still there. They're not tiled. We can't understand why someone's taken the tiles off. Maybe they've reused them somewhere else, but however. And this is what it will look like when we reopen in 2022. So the original tiles that I showed you at the very beginning, they'll be reintroduced, reshown in a graphic of what the space used to be like. So I wouldn't take too much notice that it looks a little bit modern. It's just a graphic. It's actually going to be back to its original state. The corridor, so this is the corridor that actually runs between the cafe and those new spaces now. That's what it originally looked like. This is what's happened to it over the time. So you know, we've got protrusions here from the cafe. The door separation went into now Rotorua stories, and a lot of congestion built up around these places. So we're addressing that as well. So this top one here is actually what it will look like in 2022. So up above the ceiling here, all the original skylights are still there, they're still in place. So we're going to re-expose those and the raked roof, and that brings some natural light in those spaces for us as well. So once again, we're going back to some of the original heritage. And then really what's next for us? So deconstruction works are underway right now. The removal of the shaking theatre, as I said, and actually the shaking theatre probably created some of the damage for us as well over the years. Tender for contract is out. The appointment of contractor is going to be mid-November. Construction stage 1, which will be South Wing, will be starting February 20, because we're doing enabling works now. We're out to the market right now recruiting a new director, and I still have to find another $6 million for the redevelopment of the exhibition space. So we'll be working with the Rotorua Museum Centennial Trust, who raised the $23 million in the 2011 extension to raise that money and get that underway. But that piece of work in itself, when it was done in 2011, was 4 years in bringing that exhibition together with all the different consultation and research. So we're going to be trying to do that in half the time. So we've got some challenges. And look, we're hoping the museum will open somewhere in mid to late 2022, somewhere in that time frame. It's that far away. It's a 2-year construction. If you want to keep up to date with us, if you can go onto the museum's website page, here you'll have all the latest information. It's updated at least every couple of weeks. You can hear from the project team. You can find out what's going on at the museum or other activities the museum is currently doing. But all the detail there, more than what I've shown you here today, is there. So if you want to keep up to date, please go there. And I just want to touch on briefly our partners in this project. So DPA are heritage architects. So Dave Pearson was the architect that actually did the restoration to the main foyer area when the Tudor Towers nightclub came out. So he's had a long association with the building and has done an awful lot of work in Christchurch with the rebuild down there of heritage buildings. GDC Consultants, the lead structural engineer there, Mike Osborne, he's a bit of a legend. He's from Europe and has done many restoration and strengthening projects over the years. So we're really lucky that we've got a really great team on board. Our project managers at local Opus, Burton's Construction, obviously a local company as well, as is Carlin. And then of course we're working with Heritage New Zealand. So every piece of change that I've spoken about, we have to go back to Heritage New Zealand, we discuss it, and that they have to give the tick before we can get consent for it. So it's quite a long-winded process, but you know, as I said, we've now completed the design of it, and we were in pretty good shape at this point. I think the last one is your question.
Oh, reason, I don't know if you stated it, but what's the reason for taking out the shaky chairs?
Right, so there's two things. One is that we have to put more toilets in, right?
Oh, okay.
Right, so we have no option for that. That's a compliance thing. The other one is that the shaking seats, the equipment there is deteriorated. In the last 2 years, we're operating $100,000 a year to maintain.
Oh, okay.
It's just old technology. So look, we will put something back. We don't know what that is yet or what it will look like. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
I thought they're like, I didn't even know the shaky cheese with you. That's how big it feels when you're in that place.
Yeah, I know it's one that the community are really passionate about.
Because the kids there, high paid.
We've got new stuff now, you can put on and you can go to different places.
Ah, that's where I want them off that stuff. It's
Check them up, check them up.
To be honest.
Yeah.
But hey, I love technology.
Yeah. So look, a couple of one of the other questions that's come up before, I will explain it, is about insurance. Alright, so when the building, after the earthquake, the cracks have appeared, the insurance will fix the cracks. Fixing the cracks doesn't fix the issue with the building. The whole building's the issue, what it was made of and how it was made in 1908. So our excess on the museum is about $5 million, and fixing those cracks is nowhere near $5 million. So we can't rely on the insurance to do the job for us.
Have you tried getting government funding?
Yeah, you probably missed that. You got 20 million from them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
What about the Māori Blue Note? Yeah, that's part government funding.
Sorry?
No, I was going to suggest something else, but the government funding too.
Yeah.
Fundraisers.
Absolutely. Well, we're working on that shortly.
Boxes.
Yeah.
What's about every shop?
Yeah. Well, we've got to replace a significant part of the roof. We can sell tiles.
Yeah, no, that's a big job.
$10 each. How many would you like?
Yeah, 20. Go around ask for $10 on the table, you'll be surprised how much you make.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to tie the boxes down.
Yeah. So as I said, you know, we'll start construction in February, and it will take about 2 years to do.
So long, but it's going to be well.
Yeah, I mean, look, the end result is going to be you're going to have a building that's going to be around for at least another 100 years.
And it's not going to fall down on our heads.
No, that's right. Yeah.
That's good what you're doing.
Any other questions?
so you can't open it in stages. Get one wing finished and get it up and running.
Yeah,
And work the other wing.
Yeah, no. And the reason for that is that this is our biggest, weakest point of the building. Right? And so, until we can get, I mean, if we did this and this first, then potentially we could potentially open this. The challenge we've got is the building actually is not, we're putting straight steel, the building's not straight. Right, so it's actually 350 mils longer on one side than the other, and the walls hang out and in. They're not exactly parallel. The challenge we've got is that if we keep going down this way, when we get to the end, we're going to have quite a bit to deal with in terms of, because it's out of square. So the engineers are telling us at the moment that we potentially will do this, then we might do this and finish here, because we can bring everything back to the middle. But we'll find out when we get the contractors on board. The other part is meeting all the fire requirements. So yes, we could open this till here. I can't open this because this is one fire zone here. This is another fire zone here. So I need to be able to isolate these, and you'll have cranes and all those sorts of things here. So we did look at it. Yeah. Originally we thought we'd be able to open this out wing pretty quickly, but that's not the case.
Yeah, but it's going to be all round listed.
Yeah. And but when we looked at some of the first, we were going to initially scaffold the whole building and wrap the whole building. That in itself, just for the time period, was nearly $4 million just to do that. So we've decided not to do that and do it in stages, just to keep those costs down.
Are you looking for any more construction contractors? Because I have a system that does construction. So if you need more construction contractors,
There'll be plenty of work out there.
I know.
Yeah.
That's a big job.
Yeah,
so
it is a big job.
I won't give you a card.
Just one question about the dance floor.
The dance floor?
Yeah.
The original dance floor?
Yeah.
All right, so the original dance floor obviously sat in the Atrium up on the mezzanine floor. That was removed 1980 something, I can't remember the exact date. And so that was all removed and taken away when the Tudor Power days. And back then that place was rocking.
Is that going to be open on the dance floor?
Yeah.
You know,
We need a demonstration first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is going up the top? What is the proposal? A cafe, dance?
A dance floor restaurant.
No. Upstairs, the mezzanine area becomes an exhibition space for us now because we've got the new lift to get us up there. So before we couldn't get objects up there. Secondly, it's a new conference room at the back there. So for it could be for a wedding, for instance. We decided to do weddings there. You're getting married? Wait 2 years.
Yes, I will. I'll wait 13 years with me together. I'll wait
2 more years.
Oh, wait long enough for my engagement. 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, we are trying to keep the building as much as we can to its original heritage. That's why I said we're going back to the past or back to the future, if you like. But certainly those spaces that have been hidden or changed over the years, we're going back to the original design where we can.
So, sorry I missed. When do we hope to open the doors?
Mid-2022.
But I've got to hustle you.
Yeah.
But 2022 you said?
Mid.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. We got proof.
Yeah, it's online. We're committed. It's mid-2022. Yeah. You heard it here first.
Did we hear or earlier?
Sorry?
Did we hear or earlier?
Oh, look, I really don't, it's you know, you can see the complexities and what needs to happen in that building. I wouldn't make a commitment any earlier. If we can do it earlier, we will. But look, it is a really slow, arduous and tricky construction.
Building.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, she is a lovely building.
You've got architect that and days, and it uses a vacuum.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Anyone?
Not related to it, but the centre, the Howard Morrison, when's that planned to open?
That's scheduled to reopen in mid-21.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah, so there was a talk here yesterday actually about this Howard Morrison. So
So they're taking bookings
after
21?
be late 21.
Start booking for
we would
weddings
do
or
booking.
this? I want to be
Yeah,
the first
well,
wedding.
you would have been the first
That's
wedding.
fine.
All right, we'll see what we can do. Talk to me afterwards. All right.
How much for a wedding?
We're all coming in.
Yeah, so
And you get to know how many people are on
everyone's
it.
at one.
Oh, you
I
do.
just got to try to get the funds together now.
We've got to find the man first.
Oh, she's
Hey, I found them. He won't leave me alone. Sorry.
Okay, look, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your questions. Really enjoyed that. And look, if you you've got a, we're trying to just evaluate how about these talks. So there's a little smiley face in over there. So if you're happy with what you heard, press the smiley face, please. Only smiley faces.
5 stars.
5 stars.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
5 stars.
So when
Thank you.
all the meetings are over, you'll be able to know how many people have logged. Well, that's good.
I don't have any cards about like sound system or like I said, but he's doing any more construction.